كل شيء بعرف يعني يا دوب بنحمل يعني من عيني. ومش بس انا، مش بس مع عيناتي، انا مع عينات كل المنطقه، كل نساء المنطقه.
Now, I don't know New Haven that well, but I would imagine that there are a good number of like community farms, urban farming projects that are going on. And if you link that up with the agriculture work that's being done in and around this region, you have the outlines of a local, at least food security network.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to the Struggle Video News. This headline from a Ukrainian news site warns of something awful, that Putin's forces have loaded the Zaporizhzhia nuclear complex with explosives. It's a warning from Kyrylo Budanov, head of Ukraine intelligence. The idea seems absurd, mad, to deliberately release nuclear radiation that will spread over Ukraine and probably Russia too. But who knows? The Russians almost certainly destroyed the dam on the Dnieper River, causing a huge flood downstream. That didn't seem to bother the respectable neutrals like China, India, and Hungary. Going back to the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein's forces blew up wells, oil wells in Kuwait, hoping that the massive polluting clouds would delay U.S. forces. Tyrants will do awful things. The Ukrainian Socialist Solidarity Campaign is issuing a statement to let people know about the gravity of the matter and to encourage environmental groups and trade unions to speak out. Look at their site on Facebook for news about this effort. On Palestine, still no justice for the killing of Mohammed Tamimi, 25 days and counting. Race riots against Palestinians in the West Bank by Israeli mobs are now more frequent. They beat and burn under the protection of Israeli soldiers. This photo from a video shows Israeli supporters of the Netanyahu, religious Zionist government, waving Israeli flags and blasting a song out with these lyrics celebrating arson. Who's now going up in flames? Huwara. Both homes and cars? Huwara. They are now evacuating from there the elderly, women and girls. It burns all night. Huwara. Hey, both masked and sidelocks beat the sons of prostitutes. The major riot against Huwara was last winter, with another smaller attack last week. Here's another aspect of apartheid: lack of water. This video from the Israeli group B'Tselem.
خريج وين رايحين هالقد؟
انا هلا بدي اروح اعبي ميه من الجامع زي ما بعتي دائما. بعطي ميه للقش، للطبيخ، للشرب، لكل شيء بعطي يعني يا دوب بنحمل يعني من عيني. ومش بس انا، مش بس مع عيناتي، انا مع عينات كل المنطقه، كل نساء المنطقه.
التلج بكلفني كوب المي 20 ل 25 شيكل كوب المي. يعني بنحكي عن كل يوم بعد يوم بدي 10 كوب مي 250 شيكل. بينما انه المي اذا بتتوجه مني ولا شمال منظر ماسوره المي بتبعد عني 100 متر عن بيتي، وممنوع مثل النقطة هاي أشرب منها، محرومين من المي.
يعني زي ما انت شايفه العيشه والله حياه ما هي إن عايشين زي البشر. اقول لك يعني نكذب عليك يعني عايشين زي الناس ومبسوطين. لا والله ما احنا مبسوطين، بس بدنا ناكل هاللقمه. ما يقول عشان هاللقمه بدنا نعيش وشو بدنا نسوي؟ طفينا هالعمر واحنا تعبانين، بدنا نموت واحنا تعبانين، وشو بدنا نسوي؟
اضطريت يعني اعمل دورة ابيض، هلا بعمل كمان دورة على امل انها تدور ان شاء الله يدوروها. قالوا لي احتمال مش نازل بالجدول منطقة الضاحية اليوم، مش نازل، لا مش نازل بالجدول الضاحية اليوم، ما بعرف. قالوا لي يمكن بكره، بس خلص شو بدي اعمل؟ بدي اغامر.
بتعرفي انه في ناس كتير في مناطق يمكن قريبة منا انه فيش عندهم اصلا تنكات مي، المي على طول 24 ساعة بالحنفية.
عندهم؟
مش في مناطق الضفة، مناطق مجاورة.
We've mentioned the Gandhi Peace Award going to Kali Akuno many times on this program. Here's the first part of his acceptance speech of the award to this pioneer of the solidarity economy.
All right, first, thank all of you for coming and enduring this embarrassment. Much appreciated. Two, I am really honored, truly honored to be receiving this award. I was very moved by actually seeing the carving in person and seeing the names. I looked and studied it, so I knew what was on there, but it's a difference to actually like walk and see it, and to see your own name being mentioned with so many people that you've learned from, studied, you know, tried to emulate from beginning of end of that list. So I'm truly honored. You know, and then I want to have to give my thank yous, because you don't, it's an individual award to a degree, but you don't get here without there being a foundation and communities and people who've nurtured and enabled you, you know, to do what you do. And all those folks have to be honored and respected, because this is fundamentally, I would say, their award. And chief amongst those to me would be my mama. So I want to make that plain. I would not be here without first her giving birth and doing that labor, but B, going through, you know, a lot of trying times with me growing up, and us sharing in that together, and us figuring out, or her in particular, I should say, figuring out to make some ways when there was at times very little resources or what it would appear to be hope. But she always found some way, you know, to make it happen. And I've drawn from that very extensively. So wanted to give props to that, and then all the folks, you know, who helped her along the way. Then I also wouldn't be here without, you know, those who are doing the reproductive work. I have 2 children, you know, and my wife is at home now, enabling me to do this and to be present. And we often receive these things, and many people get disappeared, particularly women, in the course of doing work. That enables us to be here and talk trash with all of you and share our experience. but that always has to be uplifted and acknowledged. So this is not something that's being awarded or received alone, and I just want to make that known. Now, in the course of doing this, you have the title, which is shifting focus of what I want to talk about. But I want to put it a little bit in context, and I know like I have a little bit of time, so I'm gonna be skipping around some things. But I'm here with I hope would be an urgent message. Because of the nature of climate change, like the time we actually have to kind of plan and shift through things is rapidly, declining. We need to be very clear about that. There is no model that any of the scientists now come up which actually matches reality, right? So we are in some ways uncharted territory. What we witnessed in 2022 alone far exceeds almost any model or projection anybody talked about. So when we witness, Mozambique and Pakistan, when nearly like 1/4 and 1/2 of their countries were flooded, or major droughts, being experienced from Madagascar to Somalia, to California and parts of the West, right? These are projections that people put off 20, 30, 40 years from now. And if you look at, what the nation states of the world are actually doing, they're acting as if we have 100 years to solve this problem, when nothing can be further from the truth. Now, part of what the shifting focus, just to start on that, part of what is asking us to look at concrete reality profoundly different. I want to bring up a couple of things of what I mean to illustrate, right? Because there's some obvious things that we've all experienced the last couple of years that we should be really gleaming from and learning from and then acting upon, but I don't think we fully recognize. And let me say one. We all lived through 2020, everybody who's here. And you will recall that the nation states of the world during the early part of the pandemic, they were able to bring global commerce pretty much to a standstill. Now, what's the significance of that? So I've been doing climate justice work since the 80s, really, but particularly since 1992. I was one of the youth people who got to participate in some of the planning formations of what wound up becoming the Rio conference that happened in 1992. That was supposedly the first major UN conference. We've been told about climate change. We've been told basically since then that the world economy and the world system is too complex and too large for it to be altered in any fundamental way, right? That the problem is so big that there is no way to tackle it. You all just witnessed that when there's a political urgency, when there's political expedience to do so, they can pivot on a drop of a dime. You witnessed that. You experienced that. So there is no ability for them to lie to us again about it's too complex, it's too large, it's too dynamic a system to be altered. We have witnessed in real time that they can do it. In real time. So to me, that brings up to us why I'm saying a conscious recognition. If we have witnessed this, first we have to acknowledge that, A, yes, I did see that. Yes, I did experience that. And then, then there are political consequences and there are political actions that then have to be taken to make sure that they actually can fulfill the demands of the people that require this system to change. That is where the gap is, right? Like we are not demanding what needs to be demanded. That is a weakness on our end, right? That we need to both recognize. And I'm arguing that that requires in part some shifts in our own consciousness, right? Because what it in part exhibits to me, and hopefully, I'm not trying to be harsh, but to be real, I think there is some truth in our minds at least that we envision changing that the end of the world is more possible than changing the capitalist system. And if we hold that to be true, then we won't build the movements that are necessary to change the future and to create a new future. So there's a battle for our own minds that has to take place in the here and now. Another thing is, let me bring it, if you just think that's one shallow example, let me give you another one. Basically, from what, May of 2020 to the beginning of 2022, you all were part of and witnessed, whether you agree with this or not, as a program that could be ushered. It just speaks to the potential of what can be done under the right circumstances with the right leadership, right, and to address need. But you all lived through basically a universal basic income experiment. Right, the government, the US government, along with most Western governments, gave out trillions of dollars to folks to keep the global economy alive, right, in the form of various types of cash payments, tax write-offs, etc. And it became so profound that they basically led a congressional revolt to end it, and they tried to end it on the basis of folks were making more money, right, from this disbursement than they were working full-time jobs. And what was the argument? We'd rather have folks working for less to discipline labor than to give out resources that have already been dispersed by society, all of us, right, and to end that experiment. Now, the other part that they don't necessarily talk about, like there was, trillions of dollars spent, in these kind of cash payments to keep the economy going. But do y'all realize there was twice as much money that was given out to Wall Street at the same time? So it's not a question of whether there are sufficient resources, right? When the need arises, they basically can print all the paper money that they want. At least the United States government, right? It's still in the position to be able to do that. So the question then becomes, why don't they, right? And part of that is we aren't demanding it. We aren't organized enough to make that demand. And that's a challenge that we have to take. So the shifting focus is, let's actually look at reality as it is, not how we want it to be. And then we need to organize based upon that. Now, one of the things in terms of what I think we can do and what we've been proposing, we put out this whole piece, if you want to look, called the Build and Fight Formula, right? And what that basically is calling us to realize is that if we look at our self-organized activity, those of you in this room, speaking to you, if we look at our self-organized activity, we're actually doing a whole lot. And we think a lot of times that what we're doing is like insufficient. And if we just look at what we're doing and not the aggregate of what everybody in our community is doing, then it is insufficient. But I'll just take one example. If you probably, and I don't know New Haven that well, but I would imagine that there are a good number of like community farms, urban farming projects that are going on. And if you link that up with the agriculture work that's being done in and around this region, you have the outlines of a local, at least food security network. So what is the issue? If we have this level of production and all this stuff going on, they're not coordinated. It's not being planned. We're not dialoguing with each other enough to come up with a plan to answer the question of what are the concrete kind of, food and caloric needs in our community? How can we produce towards those needs? And then how can we distribute based upon those needs? That requires us to be first and foremost in dialogue with each other, building a level of trust with each other, but it can be done without in any way surrendering anybody's autonomy to do what they want to do, right? Communicating with you about, hey, you're planting tomatoes, I'm planting corn. I don't want you to give up what you're doing, but can we coordinate and this enough to maybe add a little bit more to what you're doing, add a little bit more to what I'm doing, and then let's come up with the community levels of engagement to be able to provide this where it is most needed, particularly those who don't have market access or don't have the resources necessarily to go to the market. We can at least eliminate the threat of hunger from our communities. And if you want to eliminate those type of threats, you free up people's mind, time, and energy for them to be able to do other things, right? To start constructing peace. Because a lot of what we know on a base level, I can tell you from my experience, a lot of the struggles that go on out in the streets are because folks don't have sufficient resources to meet their basic needs. And once some of those needs are addressed and corrected, then people's behavior orients in a different thing. Other things become possible, right? And then like we talk about like peace and security, the reality that we know is the communities that have quote unquote the most peace are those that are most resourced, right? And where there's more stress and strain from under resources, that is where you would find the kind of proverbial violence. But we need to look at the violence that's actually constructed on the front end, which keeps us all in isolation in the first place, right? The area of the whole practice of setting up a system that encloses the commons, right? And then puts people against each other. That was the first critical act of violence that we have to work to undo. So when you hear about elements of our program about why we spend so much time and energy trying to build like our community land trust, why we made that a priority, right? It was the first and foremost, we got to take that out of the speculative market to enable some other things to happen. For folks to have a basic line of resources that they can tap into. Some place where folks in the community could come and say, I want to do a plot, to take care of some of my particular needs. We now have enough, resources to at least start with in our community for like a program like that to be built upon and expanded upon for some years. And this is something that we want to encourage everybody to kind of take up and do. And there are other practices like this that we want to put out within this formula that are built upon as links to each other that enable us to get outside of commodity relations on a practical community level to build more resources and more autonomy in our communities. But it requires a mental shift, right? And part of that mental shift is I need to communicate. I need to plan and coordinate with others in my community, right? So that we start working together on a more coordinated level without necessarily removing anybody's autonomy, right? Like that's a core piece. Because a core part of what this program is saying is that we want to shift how we practice. I'm not really interested in having a whole bunch of ideological and political debates with you, right? What I'm more interested in is how do we work beyond our differences to meet our material needs? And there's a philosophy that's embedded in this, which is we think it's easier to work ourselves into new way of thinking than it is to think ourselves into new ways of acting, right? And that if we are really working with each other, that convergence will kind of eliminate a lot of the political things that we think kind of get in the way when it's really anchored and oriented towards meeting a particular need. Because you don't have to believe, your reason for wanting to serve somebody's needs don't have to be my reason. Don't have to be we don't have to agree on that 100%. But if we agree that people's needs need to be met, that's the baseline, that's the starting point, right? We can unite on that. And then there's just some other principles like we won't discriminate in terms of who gets what, right? But we can, that's the negative discrimination, but we could also do some positive discrimination. And that means like, okay, I want to make sure the children and elderly get fed. Do you agree upon that? Right, that's a democratic decision. We want to make sure the people who aren't able to be out here farming or doing a certain level of us because of certain physical disabilities, that they also get served as a priority. We can agree upon that, right? And it doesn't require folks to kind of shift their world view per se, because I think all of us have some baseline of what we want to get to. The question is, are we engaged in enough work with each other to build up the trust and communication to enable that to happen? Right? And that is what the big part of this shift really requires. When you look at that, you got to think about what are the organizing pieces and what are the social relationships that are going to be necessary to make this happen, right? And one of the biggest weaknesses of progressive forces right now is that we don't talk to each other enough, right? And we're too fragmented in our political views, or, you know, somebody said something bad to me 10 years ago or, 30 years ago, right? And I can't, talk to them or don't want to talk to them. Fine, you ain't got to talk to them, but you can plan with other folks without doing that. Can we get to that particular point, that level? So that is what we're really pushing out. And I think, I'll leave with my final argument that if we get to this level of dialogue and communication working toward these autonomies, we'll be able to basically withstand some of the onslaught that's coming our way. Because, some of the things that I think we need to be really clear on, there's this nice techno future stuff that's being dumped on all of us, right? So you got Elon Musk who wants to go to Mars. Y'all not invited, but he's gonna keep preaching about it, right? He's gonna take all your money to get there, but y'all not invited. Then you got Jeff Bezos, right? Who's talking about making the earth a nature reserve, right? When you think about it, so if y'all don't believe me, actually go and listen to what the man says. He says he wants to move all the dirty, polluting industries to the moon, right? Move a significant number of people to outer space colonies, and then let the earth heal. Now, think about how you gonna move 8 billion people to the moon. You quickly realize that we can't put 2 people up there sufficiently now. So his plan requires massive depopulation, right? It's with the underscore of what he's really talking about. And I will wager folks that look like me ain't included in his small club, or at least not too many of us.
That's our program for today. I'm Stanley Heller. See you next week on the Struggle Video News.